Ryan had always trusted Samantha. Their relationship was built on years of shared experiences, mutual respect, and a deep sense of commitment. So when she suddenly developed a passion for swimming, he was all for it. She told him she wanted to improve her strokes, build her endurance, and take her fitness to the next level. It was an admirable goal, and he supported her wholeheartedly, knowing how much she thrived when she had a challenge to focus on. She spoke about her training constantly, the hours she spent at the pool, her progress with each lap, the new techniques she was learning. It all sounded so positive. But as the days turned into weeks, something began to feel off. Ryan noticed that Samantha never mentioned any actual competitions or milestones. She never seemed to be working toward anything specific. Just a vague desire to improve. No official results, no sign of real progress beyond her daily routine of swimming laps. It made Ryan wonder if she was telling him the full truth. One evening, Ryan decided to surprise her. He had been busy at work, but tonight he wanted to show her that he was invested in her goals. He made the decision to visit the local pool where she claimed to be training, to watch her swim, maybe offer some encouragement. But when he arrived at the pool, her lane was empty. He glanced around, confused. There was no sign of Samantha, no trace of her usual routine. He checked the time. She should have been there. Maybe she was in the locker room or had finished early, but when he asked the lifeguard, they hadn't seen her. His gut twisted as a sense of unease crept up on him. He called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Ryan's suspicion deepened. If she wasn't here, then where could she be? His mind started racing as he considered the possibilities. Was she training somewhere else? Or was there something more to this whole thing that she hadn't told him? Without thinking twice, he checked the location on her phone through their shared tracker. To his shock, she wasn't at another gym or pool nearby. No, she was at a private swim club across town, a place she had never mentioned before. A sense of unease spiraled within him, but he decided to investigate further. He drove across town, his mind working overtime as he questioned everything. Why hadn't she told him about this club? Why did she keep it a secret? As he pulled into the parking lot of the exclusive club, he saw her car parked out front. His stomach dropped. He walked toward the entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. When he entered, what he saw left him speechless. There, in the pool, was Samantha, floating but not alone. She wasn't training, wasn't even swimming. She was pressed against Lucas, a man Ryan had never met but instantly recognized as someone from the private club. Their bodies were close, too close, as they whispered and laughed together. There was no training, no discipline, just an intimacy Ryan couldn't ignore. For a long moment he stood there, invisible, watching them. The realization hit him like a wave. Samantha had been lying to him, not just about her training, but about something far more significant. The lie she'd been spinning was unraveling right before his eyes. Ryan's mind was in a blur of disbelief as he stood there, watching Samantha and Lucas in the pool. The air around him seemed to freeze, and for a moment, time felt like it had slowed down. He had never felt more distant from his wife, and yet here they were, his deepest suspicions being confirmed in the most painful way possible. He had walked into what he thought would be a routine check-in to support her, only to discover that her training sessions were nothing but an elaborate excuse for something far more dangerous. Lucas was laughing softly, his hand resting casually on Samantha's waist, a gesture that was far too familiar. Samantha, for her part, looked entirely at ease, her eyes sparkling in a way that Ryan had not seen in months, if not longer. It was clear she was enjoying herself, but what stung most was how she hadn't even noticed Ryan standing there. She had completely forgotten about the life they had built together, the promises they had made. To her, this was just another moment in her world, a world that Ryan was no longer a part of. Samantha had always been so focused on her routines, her goals, and her self-improvement. It was what Ryan had admired most about her. She had always been disciplined, driven by her ambition to be the best version of herself. But this was something different. This was betrayal wrapped in a carefully crafted lie, a lie that Ryan had once believed wholeheartedly. The silence in the club felt deafening as he took a few steps forward, his footsteps echoing in the otherwise quiet space. He wanted to shout, to storm over to her and demand answers. He wanted to confront her right there, but something held him back. Maybe it was the years of trust they had shared, or maybe it was the haunting realization that nothing would ever be the same after tonight. Instead, he stayed hidden for a moment longer, watching them. Samantha's laughter was light, carefree, but to Ryan it felt like a dagger in his chest. She had always been so careful, so controlled, and yet here she was, throwing away everything they had built, for a man who wasn't even a part of her life until recently. Ryan's heart felt heavy, his chest tightening with each passing second. The betrayal stung more than anything he had ever imagined. Lucas seemed to notice the way Samantha's laughter had shifted into something softer, more intimate. He leaned in, whispering something in her ear that made her smile again, that smile Ryan had always adored but now felt utterly foreign. As he observed them, Ryan's mind raced, the realization dawning on him more fully. This wasn't just a fling. This wasn't some casual affair. This was something far deeper, something Samantha had been hiding for far longer than he could have ever imagined. After what felt like an eternity, Ryan finally stepped forward. His presence was impossible to ignore now. Samantha's eyes flicked toward him, and for a split second, time seemed to stop altogether. Her smile faltered, and a flicker of panic crossed her face. Lucas, on the other hand, looked like a deer caught in headlights. He scrambled to put some distance between them, but it was too late. Ryan had seen enough. "What the hell is this, Samantha?" Ryan's voice broke through the silence, low and angry, but controlled. His words hung in the air, an accusation and a demand for an answer all at once. Samantha froze, her hand still hovering near Lucas's arm, her body tense with shock. She looked at Ryan, and for a moment it felt like she didn't even know who he was. The recognition seemed to sink in slowly, as if she had to process the enormity of the situation. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, she just stood there, her gaze flicking from Ryan to Lucas and back again. Ryan, I can explain," Samantha finally stammered, her voice shaky as she took a hesitant step toward him. But Ryan wasn't having any of it. He had heard enough lies, enough excuses. He wasn't interested in hearing her try to justify this. "Explain what?" Ryan's voice rose, the hurt and anger swelling inside him. "Explain what exactly? How you've been sneaking around, pretending to train while you've been here? Having fun with him?" Lucas, still standing by the pool's edge, looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. He awkwardly shuffled back, avoiding Ryan's glare, as if he could disappear in the water. Ryan's attention, however, remained fixed on Samantha. This was the woman he had shared his life with, the woman he had trusted with his heart. And here she was, standing before him, caught in a lie that had shattered everything. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," Samantha whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "I thought I could keep it under control. It's not like you think, Ryan. I was just what?" Ryan cut her off, his voice steady but heavy with disbelief. "Just what, Samantha? You were just training. You were just improving yourself, right? Is that what you were doing?" Her face twisted in anguish as she reached out toward him, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "No. Don't touch me. I can't believe you've been lying to me all this time. You made me feel like I was crazy for even questioning you. You made me think you were doing something positive, something for us, but it was all just a facade, wasn't it? All of it." Samantha's tears started to fall freely now, but Ryan didn't care. He couldn't bring himself to feel sorry for her, not after everything. This was a betrayal of the deepest kind, and no amount of tears could erase what had been done. "I never wanted to hurt you," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "But I needed something more. I felt lost, Ryan. I needed to feel alive again." Ryan felt his chest tighten, a heavy knot of emotion threatening to choke him. This was it, the moment everything changed. Samantha had made her choice, and it had nothing to do with him. He looked at her for a long time, his heart aching, his mind struggling to process the whirlwind of feelings that had overtaken him. But as the weight of the truth settled in, he knew one thing for sure. This was the end. "I'm done, Samantha," Ryan said, quietly turning away. "I'm done." The drive home felt like the longest journey Ryan had ever taken, Every mile seemed to stretch endlessly, the weight of the confrontation heavy in the silence of his car. He could still see the image of Samantha in the pool with Lucas, still hear her weak apologies and justifications echoing in his ears. He had never been so filled with rage and disappointment in his entire life. But what hurt the most wasn't the anger, it was the betrayal. She had lied to him, deceived him, and shattered the trust they had built together over the years. As he pulled into the driveway, Ryan saw the familiar warmth of home. It was a place that had always brought him comfort, a place that had once symbolized security and love. Now it felt like a prison, each brick in the walls weighing heavier than the last. He didn't know what he was supposed to do next, didn't know how to untangle the mess his life had become, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't stay in this lie. Not anymore. The truth had to come out, and Samantha had to face the consequences of her actions. He didn't want to confront her again, not right away. His emotions were still too raw, too intense. He needed time to think, to process. But that night, as he sat alone in their bedroom, the silence between them suffocating, he made a decision. He would expose her lies to their friends, their family. She had taken everything from him, and now he would take back what was rightfully his dignity, his peace of mind, and his truth. The next morning, as the sun filtered through the curtains, Ryan stood in the kitchen brewing a cup of coffee. He could hear Samantha moving around upstairs, her footsteps soft but hesitant. She knew something was coming. She had to. There was no way she could think they could just move past what had happened. The lies, the betrayal. It was too much. Too deep. He took a deep breath as he poured his coffee, his hands steady despite the storm inside him. He had never been one for dramatic confrontations, never been the type to stir up conflict. But now he was done being passive. Samantha had taken something from him, and now it was his turn to reclaim his life. She came down the stairs a few minutes later, her eyes red from the night of crying, her face pale. She looked like a ghost of the woman he had once known. Samantha stood in the doorway, avoiding his gaze, her hands fidgeting nervously at her sides. "I don't know how to fix this, Ryan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "But I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. Please, just let me explain." Ryan didn't look up. He couldn't. He couldn't face the woman who had deceived him, who had thrown away everything they had for the sake of her own selfish desires. "No," he said, his voice cold and firm. "There's no more explaining, Samantha. It's done." The words hit her like a slap to the face. Samantha stood there, her mouth hanging open, her expression one of disbelief. She had always been the one in control, always the one who kept things together, who made the decisions, but now she was powerless. And it was in that moment, as she stood there helpless, that Ryan finally understood the depth of her betrayal. She wasn't sorry for him, she was sorry for herself. "You don't get to apologize for this," Ryan continued, his voice hardening. "You don't get to make excuses anymore. You lied, you cheated, you took what we had and threw it away, and now you want me to just forgive you because you're sorry? I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. I'm not going to bury my head in the sand like I've been doing for so long. I deserve more than that, and so do you." Samantha opened her mouth to speak, but Ryan held up his hand to stop her. He didn't want to hear any more. The excuses, the justifications, they meant nothing now. He had seen the truth with his own eyes, and there was no going back. "You know what, Samantha?" he said, his voice low but filled with finality. "I'm done with this. I'm done with pretending everything is fine when it's not. I'm done with you." He grabbed his keys from the counter, his heart pounding in his chest. Samantha's face crumpled as she stepped forward, reaching for him, but Ryan pulled away, his body stiff with anger. "Please, don't," she pleaded. "Please, just listen to me. I'll do anything to make it right. Just don't leave me." Ryan didn't look back as he walked out the door. The sound of her desperate pleas followed him, but he refused to be swayed. He had made his decision, and now he was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. Later that afternoon, Ryan called a few of their closest friends, people who had been a part of their lives for years. It wasn't easy, but he knew it was the right thing to do. He couldn't let Samantha continue to deceive everyone, pretending nothing was wrong. He needed their support, But more than that, he needed them to know the truth. He told them about the private swim club, about Lucas, and about the lies that had been eating away at their marriage. He didn't go into too much detail, but he didn't sugarcoat it either. He wanted them to understand the depth of the betrayal. He wanted them to know that the Samantha they all thought they knew was not the woman he had spent years with. She had chosen this path, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. The response was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and sympathy. His friends were supportive, of course, but there was also an undercurrent of judgment. Some of them had always suspected something was off, but no one had ever imagined it would be this bad. As the news spread through their circle, Ryan could feel the weight of it all. He was losing the woman he had loved, but he was also gaining something in return: his freedom. The truth was out, and now Samantha would have to face it too. As for Ryan, he knew this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with heartbreak and anger, but at least now he was no longer living in the shadow of lies. Ryan had expected it to feel like a weight had been lifted when he walked out that door. He had imagined the sense of freedom, the satisfaction of no longer being trapped in a web of lies. But the truth, while liberating in many ways, was not an easy thing to carry. Each step away from Samantha felt heavier than the last, and it was hard to shake the feeling that his entire world had just been torn apart. The first few days after the confrontation were a blur of emotions. Ryan spent most of his time in his own space, avoiding calls from mutual friends, unwilling to deal with their pity or questions. He knew they would understand his need for distance, but he wasn't ready to hear them talk about how sorry they were for him. He was angry, and that anger burned through him, leaving little room for anything else. Every time he saw something that reminded him of Samantha, their wedding pictures on the wall, the coffee mug she had given him last Christmas, the shoes she had left by the door, it felt like another wound opening up. He needed to get away. The suffocating silence of their home had become unbearable, so he took a few days off work and went for long drives, not really caring about the destination. He found solace in the motion, in the hum of the tires against the pavement. The constant motion helped him think, or rather, stopped him from thinking too much. He didn't want to analyze everything, not yet. He just needed time to let the shock wear off, to process the devastation in his own way, without the judgment of others weighing on him. But time, as it often does, had a way of moving forward, and Ryan found himself unable to outrun the inevitable. Samantha reached out, of course. She called him multiple times, her voice trembling each time she left a message. She wanted to meet. She wanted to apologize, to make it right. But Ryan had heard enough apologies to last him a lifetime. What good were words now? What good was any of it? The damage had been done, and no amount of "I'm sorry" could undo the hurt she had caused. The messages grew more desperate as the days passed, each one asking for a chance to explain herself, to fix things. Ryan never responded, not out of cruelty, but because there was nothing left to say. He had made his choice. He wasn't going to let her back in. He wasn't going to let her lie to him anymore. Samantha didn't take it well. When she realized that Ryan wasn't responding to her attempts to reach him, she began to turn to their friends for support. At first, she tried to paint herself as the victim in the situation. She told people that Ryan had overreacted, that things hadn't been what they seemed. She claimed she had been lost and made some mistakes, but that it was a one-time thing with Lucas. She begged their closest friends to help her convince Ryan to reconsider, to try counseling, to give their marriage another shot. But the truth had already spread like wildfire. Ryan had made sure of that. He wasn't going to let Samantha paint herself as the innocent one. He had told everyone who mattered, exactly what had happened. His friends, family, even mutual acquaintances knew the truth now. Samantha's web of lies unraveled quickly once the seeds of doubt had been planted, and soon even she couldn't deny what she had done. The fallout was swift, and it hit Samantha harder than she had anticipated. The same friends who had once supported her now turned their backs. They didn't want to take sides, but they couldn't ignore the fact that Ryan had been the one who had been betrayed, not her. The shock of it all seemed to weigh on Samantha, but it wasn't just the loss of her marriage that devastated her. It was the loss of the carefully constructed image she had built around herself. She had always prided herself on being disciplined, on being strong, on being someone who had it all together. But now her truth was out in the open, and all her carefully cultivated self-image was shattered. Ryan, on the other hand, found a strange kind of relief in the days that followed. He still carried the ache of betrayal with him, still struggled with the anger and the hurt, but he knew he had made the right choice. The weight he had been carrying for months, years perhaps, was finally beginning to lift. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but Ryan could feel a shift inside him. The sense of freedom was creeping back into his life, little by little. He was no longer bound by lies and secrets. He was finally free to rebuild his life, to heal, to move forward. But it didn't come without a price. As much as he knew it was the right decision, there were moments when Ryan couldn't help but question everything. What if he had misread the signs? What if he had made a mistake? The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he didn't let it consume him. He knew the truth. He knew what had happened. And more than anything, he knew he deserved better than this. Days turned into weeks, and Ryan began to focus on himself. He went back to the gym, spent more time with his friends, and slowly started to reclaim the parts of himself he had lost during his marriage. He wasn't sure if he would ever fully heal from the hurt, but he knew he was better off without the constant weight of suspicion and betrayal on his shoulders. He was learning to trust himself again, and, in doing so, he found a sense of peace he hadn't realized he had been missing. Samantha, meanwhile, was left to pick up the pieces of her own shattered life. The man she had thought would be her escape, Lucas, had quickly distanced himself once the truth came out. He wasn't interested in the fallout, and once things became too complicated, he disappeared, leaving her to deal with the consequences on her own. It was a lonely, painful reality for Samantha. The attention she had once craved, the life she had once built, was slipping through her fingers, and with every passing day she found herself sinking deeper into regret. But regret couldn't fix what she had done, and in the end it was her choices, not her apologies, that would define her future. The days after the fallout seemed to blur together for Ryan, but there was one thing that was crystal clear. He was done. He had made his decision. He wasn't going to let this betrayal define him, nor was he going to waste any more time wallowing in the wreckage of a relationship that no longer existed. The divorce papers would come soon enough, but Ryan didn't need them to confirm what he already knew. His marriage was over. Samantha's lies had been the death knell to everything they had built, and as much as it pained him, he knew he had no other choice but to walk away. He had spent weeks processing the hurt, sorting through the anger and confusion, but there came a point when he realized there was no benefit in holding on to the past. He had spent too many years forgiving, making excuses, and pretending things were fine when deep down he had known they weren't. It was time to stop. It was time to stop caring about a woman who had proven time and time again that she didn't care about him the way he had cared about her. It was time to reclaim the life that had been overshadowed by her deceit. Ryan didn't know exactly what the future would hold, but he was determined to find out. The pain of his broken marriage would eventually fade, but he wasn't going to let it consume him. He found solace in the little things, long walks in the park, catching up with old friends, rediscovering hobbies he had once abandoned. The freedom that came with walking away from all the lies was liberating in ways he hadn't expected. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but he began to feel like himself again. And for the first time in a long time, he realized that there was more to life than constantly putting others' needs ahead of his own. He had spent years being the supportive husband, the one who always forgave, always understood. But now, he needed to focus on himself. Samantha, on the other hand, was drowning in regret. She had thought she could handle everything, that she could keep her secret life hidden, but once the truth had come to light, it all crumbled around her. Lucas, the man she had convinced herself would be the answer to all her problems, was gone. He had disappeared the moment the scandal broke, too afraid to face the consequences of his actions. That left Samantha to face the reality of her choices alone. She had spent years building a life with Ryan, and now that life was gone, destroyed by her own actions. She didn't know where to turn. Friends had turned their backs on her, and the ones who hadn't were too caught up in their own drama to offer real support. Her family, while sympathetic, couldn't understand the depth of what she had done. They couldn't grasp why she had been so willing to throw everything away for a brief, meaningless affair. Samantha had spent so much of her life pretending everything was perfect, So when the truth finally came out, she didn't know how to cope with the consequences. The loneliness crept in at odd hours. At night, when the house felt too quiet and the walls too empty, she would think of Ryan. She would think of their life together, the love they had shared, and wonder where it all went wrong. But she knew the answer. She had made a choice, and now she was paying the price. The shame of it gnawed at her. The realization that she had betrayed the one person who had truly trusted her, who had stood by her through everything, was a bitter pill to swallow. She wished she could take it all back, but she couldn't. There was no undoing the past. Days turned into weeks, and still Samantha couldn't escape the reality of her situation. She tried to keep busy, diving into work, filling her days with distractions, but there was always that nagging emptiness that followed her, no matter where she went. She had been living for herself, for her own desires, but now she was left to face the wreckage of what she had done. The people she had once called friends were avoiding her, and her attempts at reaching out to Ryan were met with cold silence. She had thought she could handle the consequences, but the truth was, she was terrified. Terrified of the life she had created, terrified of being alone, and terrified of the woman she had become. The person who had once stood tall with confidence now felt small and insignificant. She had given up the most precious thing she had ever had for the fleeting excitement of an affair, and now she had nothing. Ryan, in contrast, was finding peace in the aftermath. It wasn't a perfect peace, but it was the kind that came with knowing that he had made the right choice. He wasn't looking for revenge, nor did he want to punish Samantha. He just wanted to move forward, to live a life free of the deceit that had shackled him for so long. He knew it would take time to heal, but with each passing day, the pain grew a little less sharp, and the anger began to dissipate. Samantha, for all her regrets, had given him the freedom he needed to reclaim his life. She had made her choices, and now it was his turn to make his own. He knew he would never forget the hurt, but he also knew that he didn't have to let it define him. He had a future ahead of him, and for the first time in a long time, that future was his to shape. As the weeks stretched into months, Ryan began to see the glimmers of a new beginning. He wasn't rushing into anything, no new relationships, no new commitments. He was simply enjoying the space he had made for himself, enjoying his own company, and finding a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Samantha, meanwhile, would have to face the consequences of her actions alone, and while Ryan didn't wish her harm, he knew she had to live with the choices she had made. For Ryan, it was time to look forward. The past was gone, and all that mattered now was the future he was building, piece by piece. And in that quiet, peaceful place, he began to understand what true freedom really felt like.